Hi everyone, welcome back to today's video where we'll be taking a look at the brand new 10mm f4 pancake lens from Laowa. And a big thank you to Laowa for loaning me this pre-production copy for a few weeks to test out. But I am going to disappoint some people right off the bat by saying that this isn't a full frame lens. It's designed for mirrorless APS-C and I believe micro four thirds. Mounting this onto a full frame camera blacks out the corners that basically requires an APS-C crop to avoid. But still, 10mm on an APS-C is pretty wide, giving a full frame equivalent of around 15mm. And being a pancake lens, the thing's tiny. It is barely as deep as the width of my thumb. And despite its metal construction, it weighs less than 175 grams, which arguably makes this a perfect companion for travel and landscape and architecture shooters who want to travel as light as possible. I mean, fitted on the A6400, I found this thing is small enough to fit in my coat pocket. I mean, everything about this lens is tiny, even the filter thread is only 37mm, and the lens front remains static when focusing. Despite its tough metal build quality though, it unfortunately doesn't seem to have any weather sealing, and like all Laowa lenses, this is a completely dumb lens. Manual focus ring up front, aperture ring at the back, which runs from f4 down to f22 in one-stop clicks, and no electronic contact on the back means no EXIF data either. Now, one of this lens's biggest pluses is also arguably its biggest negative. The lens is small. But for some, it might be too small. With the tiny size of this and the fact that it needs two control rings, there is almost no room left for just plain barrel. There's a tiny slither of barrel between the two rings, but due to the big grip on the focus ring and the outward flushing of the aperture ring, there's no way to actually grip the barrel itself to rotate the lens off the body, which means fitting and removing the lens usually requires rotating one of the control rings all the way to a hard stop and then using that to rotate the lens. For me personally, this is a minor inconvenience that's sort of necessary in order to maintain such a compact size lens. The control rings themselves are easy enough to locate without needing to look, so you can adjust them without needing to move the camera away from your eye. As mentioned, the aperture ring is clicked and in full one-stop intervals, which probably isn't going to be ideal for video shooters. And while the focus ring is smooth to turn, it only has a 90-degree rotation, with the majority of the throw covering everything closer than 30cm. Thankfully, with a 10mm focal length, even at f4, the depth of field is so huge that most things land in focus once you get out beyond 1 meter focusing distance anyway. And this lens will focus all the way down to 10cm, which is incredibly close. But due to the huge viewing angles from such a short focal length, you don't really get much in the way of macro, although it can make for some quite interesting close-ups of subjects, and rocking between minimum and maximum focus distance does reveal some focused breathing. Now, let's move on to image quality. Firstly, I did notice some particular flaring from this lens early on in my testing. I then received an email from Laowa completely out of the blue advising me of a production fault that they'd found with some of their pre-production samples linked to lens flare, and that this would then be rectified in the final production version. Now, I can't say with any certainty whether I have an affected copy or if this is naturally how the lens does perform and that the faulty copies are even worse. I can say though that the colour fringing is incredibly well controlled. Even shooting wide open at backlit trees, there was zero signs of chromatic aberration, which is fantastic. Now, this isn't one of Laowa's zero distortion lenses, so there is some barrel distortion. Now, Laowa usually release correction profiles for their wide-angle lenses, although at the time of recording there aren't any available because the lens hasn't been officially released, but they hopefully will be out soon. And such profiles would also be very welcome for correcting vignetting, because this lens does have very strong vignetting wide open, and stopping down does improve the corners, but it never fully clears up, even down at f22. Sharpness is excellent in the centre, dropping off slightly in the corners, but still very good considering a wide angle of view. Incredibly, the wide open sharpness is so good that stopping down doesn't really seem to yield any major improvements other than improving the corner shading. Sharpness remains fairly consistent until you get to f16 and f22 when diffraction kicks in and the sharpness drops off. Overall, optically, a solid lens. Suffers from vignetting and distortion, no doubt a byproduct of its incredibly small size and focal length, but hopefully an easy fix once some profiles are released, and a very worthwhile trade-off if you're looking for a compact ultra-wide lens for APS-C or Micro Four Thirds. I think that really wraps up this review. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments down below. While you're down there, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please consider clicking the thumbs up and subscribing to the channel, and then hopefully we'll see you in the next video.